Okay. So, good morning, Andrea.
Good morning, Tino.
How are you?
Good, good. Almost Christmas time for us.
This is the last webinar for this year. We are
Sure,
closing.
for sure.
And I see
Yeah.
that participants are coming in.
Yeah, welcome to all our participants.
So we leave them a little bit of time so we can have more people joining us.
Yes.
Okay, good, good. Okay, Andrea, I think you can start.
Yeah, just remember to our attendees that they can use just not the chat, but the question button to make a question to us, and we try to answer live. Unless maybe are not related to the topic, and maybe you can send a later answer. Yeah, today we have this webinar. Thank you for participating in GEMI. So we are having this free webinar for all our customer and people that know GEMI. We have Tino Van de Capelle with us today. Maybe I think most of you already know is our safety expert. Two-wheel island trainer, so he's a very long experienced guy. And myself, Andras Paro, maybe we have some slide. You can go to the next one, Tino.
Okay.
Yeah, so Tino is more than 30 experience in functional safety and very expert trainer. So he can run this webinar in a very proper way. And myself, Andras Paro, I'm a background manager in GMI, working since 2015. And I was trained also by Tino long time back, I can say. So a few information about the company who is handling and giving this free webinar. GEM International is a company producer and design and produce intrinsically safe and safe devices for oil and gas market, mainly chemical, petrochemical, where there is the safety is acquired. So packages like ESD, fire and gas, BMS, IPS are essential. They need safety products. We have a long experience as well as a company, more than 40 years, founded in 1993, but we came from a former Eco Instruments company. We produce in our facility in Milan on the Prosont. We have also global presence in all 5 continents. Next, please. We produce intrinsically safe isolators, so interfaces between the field and the systems, safety relays, isolators for non-ES applications, safety power supplies, and multiplexer for temperature and digital signals, all termination board for all systems, all PLC, DCS available in the market. Hard multiplexers, surge protections, and also, of course, a bullet is Functional Safety X courses, which is not a webinar we are handling today, but is our dedicated course for becoming functional safety engineer, and of course also EX. If you want to have more details, our website, there is a dedicated page. Next. So we produce a product with the complete traceability, 100% testing products, fully automatized manufacturing process, 5 years warranty, which is very important, and also 10 years guarantee availability. So we track every single product and you can see if it's available, if it's phase out, and so on. If it's once you move from for information from available to phase out at that time, from that time, we grant for another 10 years the availability. Thank you. Next. We have a complete certification for all markets in EX market, for Europe, for America, for China, India, for Brazil, for Japan, and so on. We have also maritime certification and also safety, of course, functional safety management for the company and also for the design of the products. Next. some names. So we provide solution for all system vendors and OEMs. We also very well qualified among all the APC and end users. Next, I think is probably the next one, the last one, and I leave you to the topic today with Tino.
Okay. Thank you, Andrea, for the introduction. Also, thank you for GMI for giving us the opportunity for hosting another webinar. This webinar will be recorded. The recorded version will be later on available on the YouTube channel from GMI. There's also a certificate for your participants if you participate a percentage of the time in the webinar that you will also receive by GMI, and also the PDF files, or let's say the presentation slides that we're going to use, can also be available through a PDF file. Topic for today is not really functional safety. It is something odd because it's not called safety, it's called security. And this came with the introduction of the IEC SIG 1511 edition 2, which was released in 2016-17, or if you are listening in from the US, which I would doubt because it would mean it would be in the middle of the night for you. But if someone would be there in the US region, it's the 2018 ISA 61511. And in that standard, they are not only requiring to make an investigation about your hazards and to define your risk from your process installation point of view, they also ask us now to do a security risk assessment. And the standard is very clear, and I will have a slide on this. They say you shall carry out a security risk assessment, and they will refer to 3 different documents. So topic or the title which I've chosen is, you cannot achieve safety today without security, vice versa. You cannot achieve security without having safety. So the IEC 61511 life cycle will not be really discussed here, other than we are pointing out that everything we will discuss today is actually the requirement coming from that first phase number 1, or the top phase. So you see here like a life cycle flow chart of activities. And the first activity on any project is always to identify your hazards, try to make analysis of your hazard. In other words, trying to understand what are the potential consequences, how frequent this can happen. And if you can do those 2 definitions, then you can define your risk. For a security risk, of course, that's different. And that is why we have made that webinar here for today. So in that phase number 1, actually, I highlighted the sentence, I copy pasted from the SIG 1511 standard. It's coming from the normative section. And the normative section, if you would go to chapter 8 or paragraph 8, it will say process hazard and risk assessment. And one additional bullet, which they added in the new edition 2, was they say security risk assessment shall be carried out to identify the security vulnerabilities of the SIS. But funny enough, it's not only the SIS. As everyone will know, your factories or your production facilities are not only working through the SIS, you also have your control systems, your normal BPCS systems, you also have your normal SCADA systems, you also have your management systems. So it's a lot more than just the SIS. And that is why when you go into depth into security risk assessment, they will go a lot further than purely an IT security. It's also more related to the OT security. They refer to 3 documents. The first document which they refer to is the report number 9. So you see here TR stands for technical report. 09 means report number 9. But initially the report was released in 2013. So the reference which I made here is the latest release, which is a 2017. And that document from the ISA 884 Safety Committee is actually titled Cybersecurity Related to the Functional Safety Lifecycle. So actually this document will make the link between the 62443 and the SIG 1511, and they make a link that the engineers can try to understand how they can combine those 2 requirements or those 2, let's say, guidance together. The second one in the middle here, I call that the IT security. That's the IEC 27001 or the 27000 series. And there are many of them. There are like 40 or 50 different parts. But one of them, which they refer to specifically here, is the IT, the Information Technology Security Techniques, information about the security management system requirements. And the last one here in the, I'm just trying to move this one window away. The last one here is the 62443. And that standard, as I wrote here, is 2024 is the end date, but I'm pretty sure 2025 will have some new releases of specific sections of the standard. In other words, that standard is not mature enough today. It's coming from the old ISA 99, but it's now called the IEC 62443, and you will see we have different parts. We have 4 different clusters and 14 specific parts, but not all of them have been released as of today. Right, I'm just trying to click on the next one. Before we introduce the topic of today, I would like to just start with 3 general rules. And the first rule, and this is coming from my colleague called Stephen Smith. He's one of these cybersecurity experts and also a risk management expert. And he said, any device, or actually he referred to a report, and the report is coming from the World Economic Forum, which is the Global Risk Report, and that's rather an older one. That's one from 2012, because I also read a couple of weeks ago the newest one, 2024, which I will give you some references later on during the webinar. But rule number 1, any device with software-defined behavior can be tricked, can be manipulated, can be hacked into doing things its creators did not intend. And when Stephen was giving that example, you know, he was using a simple example as followed. He said, you take the old Nintendo game console, you can trick the software to control with your Nintendo game console your temperature in your house. To give an example, any hardware that is based on firmware, let's say, behavior, when that behavior of the firmware itself, the content can be tricked or can be changed, the hardware will not know that this was not the intention, and it will start to act the way that the new firmware is actually starting to ask it. And that's something to think about, especially when you think about firmware in all your field devices. If your field device is now for your normal BPCS, basic process control system, or your field device is, for instance, for your SIS, safety instrumented system, both of them, the firmwares, are typically not being clearly monitored that they're all on the same revision. In other words, you can have many devices in the field, same model number, same hardware model number, but maybe your firmwares are different. That means behavior can also be different. Rule number 2, any device connected to a network of any sort in any way can be compromised by an external party. And there is a lot of saying that if you believe that your firewall will protect you, that means you don't understand the technology of your firewall yet. In other words, anyone that understands how your countermeasurements are working, the question is, can they, if you connect your system onto a network, can you make it so secure that no one else with maybe a bad intention can start to do items in your networks which you are maybe, let's say, that are not wanted or not trustable. And rule number 3 is actually a human behavior rule. The user is going to pick dancing pigs over security every time. This was coming from Bruce Schneier. I was asking Stephen, I said, please, Stephen, can you explain that? Because I couldn't make the link between a dancing pig and about security. And he said, if you make a screen for an operator with a button, don't press here or don't push this button, how many people you believe would push this? And they have tested that. And remarkable enough, more than 50% are actually pushing items which they are not supposed to push, or actually where they were trying to find out what would happen if I would do it. In other words, don't trust instructions that people will follow it exactly the way they are supposed to do, because they always try to find some shortcuts, or maybe they will try out items which are not the intention. I saw a question coming in, Andrea, but I will save that until I go to the risk definition, which is coming up here in this slide. Risk and safety as a definition versus risk and security are 2 different definitions. In a safety 61511 industry risk definition, risk is a measure of anything which is a consequence that can be the consequence of hurting the people, hurting the environment, hurting your capital investment, versus the likelihood or the frequency that this can happen. And we as safety engineers, very quickly, when we are looking into a production facility, the consequences, depending on the volume, depending on the product, etc., the consequences, I don't say are straightforward, but are more or less logically for the human brain. What we never agree is how frequent this potentially can happen. And it is about that frequency that the whole safety standard is, let's say, written around, that we need to try to think how many risk reduction, what type of SIL level, what is my band performance that I need to reduce the frequency, so we are somewhere into our tolerable frequencies. You cannot sit there and think like, what is the likelihood that someone will hack my system? Because if you have to judge the frequency on that, how would you even start on that? So security definition is the risk is an expression of the likelihood or the frequency that a defined threat will exploit a specific vulnerability of your IACS. And the IACS is standing here for the Industrial Automation Control Systems. So there, a security definition, it's more about the threat itself, any person, indication, circumstances, or event with the potential to cause the loss or damage to an asset, whereas the vulnerability are the weaknesses that can be exploited by an adversary to gain access to an asset. I'm just looking here. I hope that the question that came in, what is the major difference between a hazard risk assessment with a hazard safety analysis? Would you mean with that question, maybe you can complement on your question. Would you mean with that question, what is the major difference between a hazard risk assessment for a safety assessment or for a security definition assessment? Maybe you can give me some more indication before I try to assume what your question is really asking me. The difference between security risk requirements in the IT versus the OT, that's one of the biggest challenges that anyone in that field active will face. Whereas the IT security people, they try to keep everything as confidential and secret as possible. Whereas the OT security, it's all about the availability of your production of your facility. So the, let's say, top priority for a IT top objective is the confidentiality, whereas here on the OT, it's the availability. And we have to try to mix those two. So we have to try to combine those two worlds, that we will, of course, also have to think about the IT security, all about the confidentiality of our data, our packets, etc., etc. But the OT security, it's more about the, of course, the production availability of your production units, etc., etc. When you go to the first report reference that the IEC 61511 has made, which was the report number 9 from 2017, there we have some documents, or that in that document, it will actually make the link between this safety instrumented system, or the SIS, cybersecurity risk assessment procedure, together with the PHA, or the process hazard analysis, or the cyber process hazard analysis. You will see that the techniques used for a cyber process hazard analysis is very similar to what we do in a normal safety process hazard analysis. So as an example, I give you, and there will be a white paper later on as a reference giving in the slides. One of the techniques which I've seen frequently used is called the bow tie. And some people that may not know what bow tie is like a technique where they will combine two different older techniques. One is called the fault tree analysis. The other one is called the event tree analysis. And they will actually combine those two into one, let's say, template. And this is now called the bow tie process hazard analysis. The function safety standard for the process industry, as you should know, is called the IEC or the ISA 61511. And the one for the industrial cybersecurity, the one that is mostly used today, is that one that is not 100% being released today, but it's still being used mostly. It's the 62443. The link to the PHA is a step in the cybersecurity risk assessment to help you to review the output of the PHA or the process analysis to identify the worst case to health, safety, and security, and to your environment consequences of a specific asset. And it also helps you to identify any hazard scenario where the initiating event and all controls barriers potentially could be hackable. I give you a simple example. If you would have an old relay cabinet and the old relay cabinet is your safety cabinet and there is no communication, or it's called a solid state system as some vendors still supply you with. Those techniques were developed in the years 70s, mid 70s, so they are pretty old today. But those are the most secure systems you can find today on the market. As long no one has access to that cabinet, as long no one has the key to the cabinet and there is no communication in and out, that's a very secure system. Any modern programmable software PLC vendor on the market today is hackable, period. No matter what they may tell you, they are all hackable. You may ask yourself the question, I will come back on this later, why does all the safety PLC vendors today only have a maximum security level equal to 1? And I will show you security levels later on. That's the lowest level of security that you can achieve according to the 62443. The second reference in the standard on the 61511 is saying, please have a look in the ISO 27000 series. And as I told you, there are many of them, and that is here a summary of the majority of them. So specifically, if you go in the IT security, that will be the reference documents that you have to go into. And I have given you here the link on the website where you can read some more information about those. And the last one, which is the one mostly used today in practice for doing security risk assessment, is called the 62443. And the 62443 is not a simple, let's say, single standard with like 2 or 3 parts. There are 14 parts, but those 14 parts have been actually being divided in 4 major clusters. And where you see here the symbol of a lamp or a bulb, that means those parts of that clusters are not being released yet, are still under development. I can already give you here the information that some of those clusters, or parts, although they were being revised very recently, and I'm looking here to cluster 3 part 2, that section here has been released somewhere in the summer of 2020. That was the famous COVID or the unfamous COVID year. Well, although it has been released in 2020, it is already again under revision to have a new revision coming up in the next coming years. The latest one by memory that was just being released in August of this year, 2024, was this part number 1 of cluster number 2, which is security program requirements for IACS asset owners. That means for the end users or the operating companies. Starting with cluster number 1, how can you look into those clusters? Well, the cluster number 1, I call it like the general one or the generic one. That will be all the procedures, the framework, the definitions, the abbreviations, etc., etc. So in that you will see the concepts and the models that the standards will explain. It will give you the glossary of all the terminologies and all the abbreviations. It will give us in the future, because that's not been released yet, it gives us the system security conformance metrics on how we can actually express them. And the last one here, that will be more explanation about the security lifecycle and some use cases. The lifecycle has been drafted here in the part number 1, but in part number 4, they are supposed to give us some additional use case examples. In cluster number 2, there are in the meantime 5 parts, because in the beginning there only were 4 parts. That's the newest baby on that cluster here. That's number 5. And as you can see over here, in part number 1, it is specific for the end users, and that is the one that has been just been revised again in August 2024. So if you would go to the IEC web store and you would look for that reference, you will see that you can buy a newest, latest revision. It's security program requirements for the IACS, Industrial Automation Control System, asset owners or end users. In the part number 2 will be the protection levels for an IACS. The patch management is in part 3, and the requirements specific for service providers is in part number 4. And they are planning to release a document which is called an TR, means a technical report, and it's the implementation guidance for the IACS asset owners or the end users. Cluster number 3, that is the system-wide cluster. That is, if you are the end user, if you are the system integrators, if you start to combine some, let's say, equipment together, you will have to look for specific security technologies that can help you as being a countermeasure. One of the simple examples which I can give you, and I'm looking here to my pen, which you can see in my camera. Assume that your pen is a pipeline, and I'm talking about a production plant pipeline now. If you have a one-way valve in this pipeline that your product can only stream from this side to this side, well, this one-way valve is also a principle that we're going to use in communication, and we're going to call this a data diode. And a data diode means you can have some communication from this end to this end, but there is no communication that is possible to go back to the other end. Security risk assessment and system design, that is a section that, as I told you, was released, newest release was 2020. It's again under revision. And the last one is security requirements and security levels, which is part number 3. And then specific for the hardware and software developers that are working for some component vendors, they will have to follow here the security product development lifecycle requirements, and also they will need to, of course, understand and master here the technical security requirements specific on components. We have 4 levels. In the beginning, there was also SL0. SL0 was basically saying security level 0. There is no extra measurements that needs to be taken. So, of course, they have taken this out in the standard. The standard now today has 4 levels: SL1, SL2, SL3, and SL4. And in that security level is kind of a quantitative levels describing that if you say that your system needs to go for a target SL1 that needs to be protected against a casual or a coincidental violation. That is the one that I told you that all the safety PLC vendors today, the maximum level they have been accredited to, according to the accreditation offices, is an SL1. SL2 would mean they are protected against intentional violation using simple means with low resources, generic skills, and low motivation. That means that the SL2, there need to be already some intentional violation, not a casual violation, but someone planned to do something with simple means. In other words, again, you would think about your, let's say, expensive installation, that an SL2 would certainly not be strong enough to protect you against whoever has an intentional violation. Without naming the company, but a multinational international company in the oil and gas industry worldwide made a decision 2 years ago that all their installations needs to go to an SL3. That means they need to install specific countermeasurements to increase all the way up to an SL3 protection against intentional violation using sophisticated means with moderate resources, IACS specific skills and understanding, and also moderate motivation. And if someone would understand or remember the famous Stuxnet virus in the year 2010, which was the virus which was working on a protocol of communication on a industrial system controlling some installation. Well, if you would Google Stuxnet virus, I'm pretty sure you will find many documentation about the Stuxnet virus. And I would say even with the Stuxnet virus, an SL4, protection against intentional violation using sophisticated means with an army of engineers, because that is what Stuxnet virus was, army of engineers, IACS specific skills, and high motivation. That is the level of security that you will have to protect yourself against. There will be a target security level, there will be an achieved security level, there will be a capability security level, similar to what we do in safety with our SIL or safety integrity level with our systematic capability, very similar to what we have also here in security level. Right. If you look into an entire scheme of the system, and that schematic is also coming from the IEC 62443, you see that they divided here specific zones. So those are all called zones. And the zones can be connected with a communication channel or a conduit, as they call it. And as a symbol, they show you here a firewall in a zone. So basically, we can make a zone towards a certain security level using specific countermeasurements. but the communication we use between the two zones can never be secure and can never be safe. As you would hear if you would follow a complete safety training or a security training with us, a protocol can make communication safe, not the media. That's the same with the security. The countermeasurements are trying to make the communication secure, not the media. So media, in other words, if you now communicate wireless, fiber optic, or you go over an old Modbus or an Ethernet or whatever you try to communicate with, well, that, let's say, media cannot make it safe or unsafe, cannot make it secure or unsecure. I inserted here a new slide because we have given this webinar earlier. I think it was this year, it was maybe last year. That's news which I actually took out of the newest edition too, from August 2024, to give you an idea about the differences of the roles and the responsibilities between an end user, which is here called the asset owner, between a maintenance service provider that will provide some service towards security in your system, and also the role of the integration or service provider who will potentially build the system, integrate the system, etc. And if you look here on the right-hand side, this represents your IACS, which stands for the Industrial Automation Control System. And the asset owner means the end user. They are the ones that are accountable for the correct and secure functioning of the IACS systems. They also operate, of course, following their operational capabilities, which will be described in their operation procedures and their policies. And the maintenance service provider, which may be the maintenance engineers themselves that are also working for the same asset owner, or it could be an external maintenance service provider. They will maintain and decommissioning those systems need to follow again the maintenance procedures and policies. They, of course, will try to maintain, that is their challenge, to try to maintain your automation solutions. And in the automation solutions here, you see here in the middle, the safety function as part of your essential functions. You will also, of course, have your control functions. And on top of that, you may have some complementary functions. Well, as you can see here, the integration service provider, which is in the IACS environment, they need to commission and validate that they are working as per the security requirements, and they also will design and deploy specific countermeasures enabled to achieve that security level. Now, if you look here on the independent of the IACS environment, that means once you have a product supplier, which is a neutral supplier to all the different end users, to all the different asset owners, they have an independent IACS environment. This product supplier will develop and will support the control system as a combination of, could be software application, could be embedded devices with embedded firmware, could be network devices, or could be host devices. And that is the newest slide on that webinar that I would like to share with you. Okay, Andrea, we have a poll to launch. Okay, so the question is, which cluster of the IACS, which we have just been quickly referring to, and you had a cluster 1, 2, 3, and 4, which cluster covers the system-wide requirement that an end user / asset owner or the operating company is accountable for? And if you were just paying attention to what I just showed you, that may be an easy answer. In the meantime, I'm reading a few questions here. So there is a question coming in. What is the specific scope of the 62443? Who should seek certification? Well, that's a very open, wide question. So the specific scope of the 62443, as you will see in the title, is, of course, for the security risk assessment for a industrial automation control system. And it's, I call it in general, the OT security. Who should seek certification? It depends on how you look for certification on your specific unit, on your production unit, or in entire installation, or do you look specific for certification on your equipment, because those are two different type of certification, which I have later on in the collected questions. So we also have a Q&A section for today. I collected some questions that I already prepared some answers for. Right, in the meantime, we do need some, let's see, we only have half of you that are awake, the rest is still sleeping. So show a bit of respect and click on this button. There is no money to lose or to gain. There's also no face to lose or to gain. So please do us a favor and answer that potential poll question. We still need a few more clicks. Otherwise, I go and strike, as this is the last one for 2024. Joking, of course, but in the meantime, there is one more. Okay, we need one more to click. I get one more question. If a firewall is connected to the network system and we experience a vulnerability cyber threat, what secondary measure can be adopted to prevent any further attacks? Well, if I would have a glass ball, I would be able to answer you, my friend, but I don't think I have a glass ball here in front of me. So that takes a bit of thinking. I would be referring to our expert that can actually get in touch with you and give you some more specific question. But I do understand what the question is. It's a very valid question. But I'm afraid that here in my remaining 21 minutes, I would probably spend too much time. So we have to answer this offline, Andrea. All right, in the meantime, we will end the poll and I will share the results. And as you would see here that the majority, almost majority of 38% answered cluster number 3. And this is, of course, the correct cluster of the complete system. Of course, you will also have to have some, let's say, notification of the general cluster. But if you look on the IACS, what the end user or the system design is accountable for, that is, of course, this cluster 3, the main cluster that you have to look into. Cluster 4 is specific for components vendors. Cluster 2 is all the procedures and the policies. And of course, cluster 1 is the framework. But we were after here this cluster number 3. Okay, let me continue with the remaining of the slides. The life cycle in the 62443 is starting with a high-level cyber risk assessment. That means that we need to make a high-level risk assessment. First of all, we will have to list all your assets. Then we have to think about, or we need to retrieve from the end user, what is the security level that they try to go for in their production facility. Then we need to look into the physical layout of the facility with also the physical connection between all the systems. That means we will have to do the zone allocation, and also we need to identify where are all the potential channels and the conduits between those different zones. Then in phase number 3, we have to have a specialist who will do some penetration, some detailed cyber risk assessment in the installation, looking for some vulnerabilities or some weaknesses in your installation to see that, do you need to design some additional countermeasures, yes or no? In case we find some items that we need to find a solution, either we can find some other means of risk reductions. That can be, as a simple example, the access to your control system, buildings, cabinets, platforms, etc. Versus that could be some specific technology countermeasures that will be then ending up here in a cybersecurity requirement specification, leading into design and engineering of specific countermeasures. Both risk reduction techniques will be combined together, will be installed, commissioned, and validated. And then at the end user needs to maintain this, needs to monitor that. And if you are monitoring your cybersecurity, let's say, performance, that means that you need to be able to be ready with a response and also with a recovery plan in case some items would be happening in your system. In terms of where do you have to start? Well, that document that I was mentioning before, that was released in 2020, has been already under, or is again under revision currently. The chairman of the, let's say, part number 2 of cluster 3, his name is John Cusimano. In the meantime, John has moved on, is no longer working for that company called AE Solutions over here. But I hope that this link is still available. That was here the link to the website that's giving you the link to the white paper. And the white paper is giving you an idea, starting with document your system, do your vulnerability assessments, do your partition of your systems, then ask the cyber specialist to do your PHA review via a risk assessment workshop. In the background here, you see a risk matrix, but in there will also be a bow tie to assess. Also, as a title is showing here of the white paper, it was using a bow tie to do the complete assessment. And here they go into some mitigation planning. So more guidance free of charge is the DNV, which has the recommended practice called the RPG 108. And in that recommended practice, which was released and it's free of charge, available on that website link here, was from September 2017. It was a consortium between ABB, DNV, Emerson, Honeywell, Kongsberg Maritime, London, Norway, Petroleum Safety Authority, Norway, Shell, Norway, Siemens, still using the old name Statoil, which is now called Equinor, and Woodside Energy. So basically what they have done with all these companies, you can see majority of end users, engineering companies. There are also some vendors in there. There are some end users. There is some regulatory body in there. Together they formed a consortium, and they came up with a kind of a guideline recommended practice with based on a kind of a flow chart, enabled to help the industry how to start making a cybersecurity in the oil and gas based on the 62443. Top number 10 vulnerabilities. Number 1 is the lack of cybersecurity awareness and training among the employees. Talking about training, that's also one of the main reasons why we will also try to promote our training on cybersecurity for doing this type or understanding this type of business. Another one free of charge is the HSE Operational Guide OG86, and we are referring clearly to edition 2, as there was also an older edition 1. But by the HSE from England Health and Safety Executive, they also brought out this guidance to help the engineers in the industry, referring to the 61511 together with the 62443, how to combine those in able to make your security risk assessment. I also give you here a reference to the NAMUR. There are 4 different documents, and that is the only one which is not free of charge. Copyright. That means that if you want to use those documents, you will have to purchase them on the NAMUR websites, which is possible, of course. Here we have the recommendations that are the NEs. The NA stands for the worksheets, and there will be a worksheet here for remote maintenance for automation systems in the process industry. They give also the German title, that's the English title, that was already from 2011, so that's rather an older document. I checked recently, there is no new revision yet. Here we have the NE 153, which is the Automation Security 2020, Design, Implementation and Operation of Industrial Automation in the Automation Security. And that the edition came from the 2015, but has been revised in the meantime. Then you have a security risk assessment of your SIS, and here you have the automation security management in the process industry. So more references. Clearly, you need to check if you are based in Europe. Please go and check the NIS or the NIS2 directive, which is active since October 2024. The directive itself was active since the year 2019, but have given all the member states in Europe 5 years to get their act together. And of course, as you probably will understand, many nations around in Europe are not ready yet, although there are already some inspections referring to the NIS2 directive, which have some very high penalties in terms of financial penalties. If there is a potential hack or breach into your security system on your installation, you have 24 hours time to report it, and there is a penalty in the range of 10 million. That's one number that I remember. 10 million or 2% of your annual turnover for any company with more than 50 people. Of course, you also have the general data protection requirements. And as you can see here, and I will not go through all of them, they have very specific, one in Germany, one in the UK, one in the US, which is the NIST framework here. That's a cybersecurity framework. In the UAE, you have the NISA, etc., etc. So you have all these different references nationwide or worldwide that will be looking into security specific on your installations. And that is about it. We launch one more poll and then I will finalize with some questions and answers. So if you look into security levels associated with the following description, which of the SL1, 2, 3, or 4 would represent protection against intentional violation using simple means with low resources, generic skills, and low motivation? And we also give a little bit of time again to look into this. In the meantime, I'm opening here quickly a file next to me. Okay.
We are having more answer here, Tino. I think people got to the point.
Okay, so we are ready to launch it. Give me 1 second. I'm just sliding into a slide which I wanted to mix in my answer, but as Murphy's Law is also applicable now on my platform here, it's opened, but I'm nearly there. Here we go. Okay, so the protection against those simple means or intentional violation with simple means is, of course, here the SL2. So let me share you the result, and that's all the majority. So that means we have people paying attention. So it's not SL1. And remember that SL1 is what currently your safety PLC, even if it is a SIL 3 PLC or not, that is the maximum security level that they have been able to achieving on their system. So that may start you thinking that, what additional countermeasurements will I have to install in my system enabled to protect me? If you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand the problems and you don't understand your technology. That's a very hard saying, but apparently there is a lot of truth in there. That is what I've been every time trying to be convinced by our security specialist. And that's something also to think about. Okay, so whatever countermeasurements that you may go for, end of the day, make sure that if someone else that understands the technology better than you do may find a way around it, can still go and damage some of your installation. How can we help you? Very briefly, of course, with services on SIG 1511 and on 62443. That's the training that I was already mentioning you before. That can be 100% virtual, or it can also be classroom led trainings. That means it can be on location, face to face. As Andrea was saying, we are mainly providing you with TOV Rand accredited training courses. Of course, we also do non-TOV related training courses, which are then customized, but specific if you are after some personal certificate to prove how competent you are in either safety or in security. Well, those are the 2 or 3 training courses here that are listed that we can help you with. We also have this manual from GMI, which is mainly about safety, nothing related directly to security. So it's purely safety. That's also a book that is available. And before we're going to stop today, I want to give you some collected questions which we collected earlier during the registrations. And of course, that I always have the freedom to select the questions that I like to answer myself. And of course, we'll first of all look to the questions which are related to the topic, because some people ask me what will be the weather be tomorrow or something. So I don't have a glass ball, so I'm not answering those type of questions. I'm trying to relate them into the topics. So what is a good rule of thumb to determine how much risk reduction per cost, if it is now dollar or euro or your local currency, it doesn't really matter. And what is the best practice? Well, I already can imagine. Correct, we don't have a glass ball, but still, I can sense what is the reason to ask this type of question, because there are so many different approaches. And when we started with safety integrity level or the SIL introduction, end of the 90s, beginning of the year 2000, we were living in a jungle of functional safety that people were believing they understand what safety integrity level means today. And I can tell you, after being in this industry for more than 30 years, we still living in the same jungle. And I have a fear that security And the way they are doing security assessments today is a bit of the same jungle, similar to what we have seen in the beginning of our safety standards. So there is no one size fit all rule of thumb here. There is no rule of thumb, period. Perform a risk assessment, preferably by a, let's say, expert that can prove some competency and hopefully can prove some evidence that they have done this type of assessments before on similar installations to what you will try to do your assessments for. So they will have to do the identification of the assets, analyze the assets, look at the threats, assess also the vulnerabilities in your system, and try to determine the risk levels together with, of course, the corporate management or the plant management of that installation. They also have to do a cost-benefit analysis to evaluate what are the countermeasures for the cost effectiveness using the return on security investment, which is called the ROCE here, to prioritize the high impact versus the low cost solutions. Also, we are looking to adopt a defense in depth. That means you will identify and implement different layers, similar again to the layers of protection and safety. Here we're talking about the layers of security. It can be combining technical also with some procedures, with some physical measures, etc., etc. Also focus on the high-risk areas. Use the 80-20 rule, and the 80-20 rule also referred to as the Pareto principle, to address the critical vulnerabilities that account for the majorities of the risk. And I'm just looking here to what I have prepared. So not all the assets in the IACS will, of course, have will be having the same identical criticalities. So the 20% of the most critical assets may represent 80% of your operational risk. And then the last one here is the continuously monitoring and improve. That means the monitoring principles will be very important to reassess your risk, use your measures to control the effectiveness of that, and also adjust investments based on emerging threats and changing risk profiles. The other question which we selected, how does certification support safety and security? And one of the open Q&As that came in was asking about that certification. That's why I said, let's first answer that question, because maybe it was you that filled in the same registration questions that I will answer otherwise twice. That's why I would prefer to do it now. How does certification support safety and security? The word certification, funny enough, is not a requirement of any standard, not in safety, not in security. Specifically, an assessment is a normative requirement in the standard. In other words, when I'm saying I do comply to a standard, I need to prove that. How can I prove that? Well, someone will have to make an assessment either from my installation or from my techniques or from my equipment, if I'm a vendor, from my specific countermeasure that I may to produce or may give to you or sell to you. Opposite, you may also have, for instance, a certification on your performance of your installation. That is maybe a combination of different components. So an assessment is a requirement, a certification is not. But if you look on a piece of paper called certificate, if you would read that piece of paper, they or the accreditation officers or companies will say, we make a statement that whatever equipment they have made an assessment for is in compliance, and they will list you a reference of documents or a reference of standards. So vendors will use in either to compete with each other, saying, I've got this piece of paper and they have this piece of paper and mine is better than his. That's a classical sales story. But the piece of paper is making a statement, and that statement is called a certificate. But the certification, again, is not a requirement. The assessment is a requirement. The piece of paper called certificate will be used as a credible reference for that vendor to sell you their services or their equipment. However, when you do have a document called certificate, which is actually a good news, because that means someone has made some work on it, has made some assessment on it, and someone has made a judgment for that. That means you don't have to do it, someone else have done it for you. And I give you here an example. On a 61508 compliant device, if you now have a SIL 1 or a SIL 2 or a SIL 3, different level of safety integrity level, the IEC 61508 is clearly stating the following normative requirement, which is a must to prove. For a SIL 1, the vendor needs to prove that an independent person, different than the person who was responsible for the development of that equipment, has made an assessment. So SIL 1, independent person. SIL 2, they go one level up and they say, we need to see evidence of an independent department. And when you go for a SIL 3, that's the only requirement for a SIL 3 to go to an independent authorization or an independent organization that will be an accreditation officer that may give a statement to say that this equipment is in compliance to SIL 3. That's also what Andrea was showing you earlier in the slides on the introduction of the company of GM International, that they have a complete list of all different requirements that have been assessed on their equipment, and those specific companies are making a statement that the products of GMI fulfill the assessment reports of that specific reference document called as an example, IEC 61508 or the IEC 61511 or the ATEX directives, etc., etc. That's a long question. Hopefully it's a shorter answer, but interested in everyday practice examples, how to make complete communication, line cybersecurity verification, for example, of SL2. If you install a firewall module with SL2 between business and control networks, is it enough to protect control network? Well, that's a very similar question also as we have seen coming up or popping up in the Q&A. As you can imagine, because we also have to honor all the other people listening into the webinar, this is not a free consultancy of a quick 2 minutes picking the brain and we give you a solution worth maybe 2 weeks of work. So we try to give you something without giving you, of course, the complete explanation, as we cannot do this here. Again, such type of questions I always like when I get them into the registration, but basically I'm keep on telling the same answer. We cannot give you the complete solution here, yes or no, because that depends on so many different items. And guess what? As this is recorded, there will be some specialists listening to what I'm explaining to you. And if even one of my solutions is not fitting to the other brain of the other expert, I'm getting all these friendly emails. Tino, I'm not agreeing with you. So listen, security levels have to be broken down in those 3 different levels. Again, the targets, what do you achieve? What capabilities of countermeasurements can you actually prove? And those 2 of security measurements, again, and I'm repeating what we already have shown you in the slides, you will have process security measures that are implemented in policies, procedures, training of competency of your engineers and people that needs to use it, and also process contained within your facility-wide programs, such as your operation procedures, your maintenance procedures, your engineering procedures, and you also will have to look into your technical security measures, which are targeted to specific assets, equipment, or systems where the level of technical security measure comprehensiveness will vary by the risk significance of that specific asset. With those 2 statements, I answered your complete question. However, you will have to do a lot more research than just going by those 2, let's say, summarized examples. And the last one, and because I like this one for many different reasons, and again, I hope that the other specialist will look into the recorded version, so we always have to be very careful or it can be used against us. And I already had some people getting very annoyed to what I say in public. So current safety systems training certificate is being provided by TUV. Between brackets, there are many different TUVs. We have TUV Rhineland, TUV South, TUV North, TUV SAR, TUV RW. And I can keep on going for at least another 2 or 3 minutes. So I can mention about 40 or 50 different TUVs for you. Exida, there's only one Exida, and there's of course also our dear friends from the ISA based from North America or from the USA. Just wanted to know which one is better in terms of knowledge gaining and sharing. Well, guess what I will answer? They're all good. They're all the best in the world. It all depends on which one do you need. So all the programs are very well established in the meantime. And I'm not hiding this. Exida was the first one on the market exactly in the year 2000. TFV Ireland was the second one on the market in the year 2004. The ISA was a third one in the market, and it was after TLV Ireland. And then all the other programs you will find on the market, they all came in later on because they say, oh, there is a market. Look at what the other ones are doing. Maybe we can also get some money from that. And we also will provide you some training. And that's basically what is a training today as it stands. But when you do choose a program, I think it's crucial to focus not on the brand name, not on the logo or the label of the company providing the training. I would focus on the trainer experience. Okay, I've been a trainer in the program for, let's say, the last 20 years, so I do have a proven track record. If you would go to my personal website, because I'm an engine nerd or an engineer, so I will show you how many people I have trained, and it is nearly 3,000. So somewhere in the next 2 months, 2025, I trained personally 3,000 engineers, specific in functional safety, specific on 6.15.11. And there is no one trainer in the entire world on the SIS 6.15.11 that can prove the same record as I can prove to you. And that's something that you need to think about. There are new trainers coming up, and we are glad we have new trainers joining the program, because we're also looking into either retirement, or maybe we will quit the job, or maybe like one of my founders that was together with me, we were 4 founders of the program. He passed away in the meantime. So yes, we will have some, let's say, we will have some people moving out of the industry. But if you have to choose still today or tomorrow or the next coming years, I'm not planning to quit in the next coming years. So I think my message is very clear. 20 years experience with TLV Ireland. I can tell you that TLV Ireland, and that is the one that I'm staying with, because I was also offered to go to work with the other, let's say, trainer providers, and I turned it down in the sense of I respect my first, let's say, vendor, which was TLV Ireland, that I was working with together. We have in the group of TLV Ireland trained more engineers than all the competitors together. That means that we have the biggest coverage worldwide. Is that good or bad? Well, at least we have the most, let's say, number of people and companies and countries trained. And that is, it means something if I would look which is gaining or which is actually providing some experience. That is what I would look into. Okay, I'm at the end of my lecture. Andrea, you can launch the last poll.
Yeah.
And let me see if there is some more Q&A in the meantime, because I did not monitor them all the time. Okay, security risk assessment with hazardous analysis. All right, that was the question related to the previous question. All right, so we have some very specific questions here coming in. I'm looking at this one that was starting with what is the major difference between a hazard risk assessment with hazard safety analysis. So then the same person was talking about that firewall and is asking me now security risk assessment with hazard analysis. So I would ask you to please have a look in the white paper from AE Solution. It's rather an old one, but it was giving out after this new cluster 2, cluster 3 part 2 came out, which is that document from the summer 2020. Look into the bow tie analysis, and that is what hopefully will answer your question. Then I'm getting another question from another gentleman. What are the 62443 requirements, not for the end users, but for hardware embedded software providers? Well, that is cluster number 4, which is specific for the component, specific for developers. And then I actually have over 20 years of experience in quality certification. The question is eternal and is often asked in annual planning budgeting. As you say, I did not find a clear answer. Well, I am afraid there is no clear answer to that question, and I do understand where you're coming from. You struggle probably with the same items as we struggle with. If you know in quality certification or you are in a certification toward a reference, end of the day, it's always subjective. I give you a quick example. I have done an assessment in a safety assessment on a existing installation, and I got a comment from the customer afterwards. He said that, thank you for your findings, blah, 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 blah. However, the previous assessor that came in here last year, he found this, 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 this. You have not mentioned anything about that. And the ones you found, he didn't mention it at all. And I told them, that's exactly what you have to do, Mr. End User. Always find you a new assessor, a new specialist that comes in, because we all have our own way of thinking, our own way of finding items, and it's a matter of trying to close the gaps. If you always go every year with the same inspector assessor, you may never find anything new. And that's the final word on that answer to that question. With this, I apologize that I was 7 minutes over time, but that's normal. I'm always taking more time than needed, because we can probably talk for more than what we are giving. But I hope it was useful. I hope it was worthwhile. I thank again GM International for providing us the time and to ask us to do these webinars. Thank you again. Have everyone a wonderful end of year and a good Christmas. And thank you, Andrea. Hope to meet you soon again in live person, not virtually, because I'm sick of virtual meetings. I like to meet real persons. Okay.
Thank you, Tino. Thank you, all our attendees, and thank you for all this information. Such a short time, live, say, time frame is always our enemy. Thank you, all people, and have a good Christmas time and Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.